heating up.
We're beating Biden.
How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill. We know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America. Happy Friday and welcome to Firstpost America. I'm Eric Ham, coming to you live from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Over the next few minutes, we'll take you from the United States and around the world, covering all the top stories of the day. But before that, here's a look at the latest headlines. The United States and Britain carry out airstrikes on Yemen-based Houthis in a bid to destroy their attack capabilities. The Houthis say the airstrike killed at least 16 fighters, leaving 35 wounded. Defense chiefs from the United States and China meet in Singapore, the first such meeting in 2 years. Bilateral contact between the two militaries broke down in 2022 after then U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, infuriating Beijing. China says it will not attend the Ukraine peace summit if Russia is not invited. On the 15th of June, Switzerland will host representatives from over 50 nations, including Kyiv, to discuss the ongoing war in Ukraine. To date, Moscow is being excluded from attending. South Africa's ruling party, the African National Congress, is on track to an abysmal showing in the recent elections. After being unable to secure 50% of the vote, this marks an end to its 30-year political dominance. And an ongoing heat wave kills at least 54 across India's northern regions. At least 9 states, including the capital, New Delhi, record temperatures over 120 degrees Fahrenheit or 49 degrees Celsius. We begin right here in the United States, where former President Donald Trump has been convicted on all counts in the hush money case in New York. The 12-member jury unanimously agreed that Donald Trump falsified business records to hide a payment meant to silence porn star Stormy during the 2016 presidential election. The GOP presumptive nominee now becomes the first ever former or serving U.S. president to be convicted of a crime. The case now moves to the sentencing phase, where Judge Juan Marchand will impose his penalty on July 11th, just 4 days before the Republican National Convention, where Donald Trump will officially accept the nomination for president. When the guilty verdict rang out, Donald Trump reportedly sat motionless in silence. After court proceedings ended, the former president called the conviction a disaster and blamed the verdict on, you guessed it, President Joe Biden.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end and we'll win, because our country's gone to hell.
The verdict plunges the United States into uncharted territory with the presidential election just 6 months away. The charges he's been convicted of are Class E felonies, and the sentence could include fines, probation, home confinement, and community service. Now, of course, the maximum penalty that can be imposed under New York law is 4 years in prison. And given Trump's lack of remorse, as well as his continued attacks on the validity and credibility of the court proceedings, that too is not off the table. Meanwhile, legal experts believe that Donald Trump is unlikely to be jailed, as he is a first-time offender. Trump's lawyers, however, are likely to appeal the conviction, arguing that the indictment was politically motivated. Now, the conviction does not legally prevent Donald Trump from running for office or becoming president, even if he is serving jail time. However, the former president would not be able to pardon himself, as the charges brought against him were not federal but state charges. The jury's verdict has left Americans divided, with some hailing the judgment while others adhere to Trump's talking point, calling it a political witch hunt.
Well, I mean, came out, guilty as charged. Do the crime, you gotta do the time, regardless of how it be served us, you know? It is what it is.
I think the reaction that I have to the verdict is that this is absolutely a travesty of justice. This is something that has shown to all of the American people out there how corrupt our government and our court systems have become, that you would go after a political opponent in the midst of a campaign with a charge that was done 7 years ago.
Now, President Biden's campaign slammed Donald Trump just minutes after the verdict and said that no one was above the law. Meanwhile, Republican lawmakers remain steadfastly behind the ex-president. Now, polls conducted during the Republican primary showed that many voters would withdraw their support for Donald Trump if actually convicted. Nevertheless, the Trump campaign's website crashed hours after the verdict was announced due to a massive influx of donors wishing to donate to the campaign coffers. Donald Trump still has 3 additional criminal indictments pending. Surprisingly, the hush money case in New York was considered the most difficult to secure a conviction. Now it's unclear if or when those other cases, 2 federal cases and 1 state case, will actually go to trial. But now the nation watches to see if Donald Trump has a political metamorphosis after this historic conviction. And staying in the United States, President Joe Biden has allowed Ukraine to strike inside Russian territory with American weapons, with some caveats. The commander-in-chief has restricted Kyiv to using American weapons only near the Kharkiv region in the northeast of Ukraine. The move comes a day after the White House said it did not encourage the use of U.S.-supplied weapons to strike inside Russia.
We're aware of the interest that President Zelensky has expressed in this regard. I would tell you that there's no change to our policy at this point. We don't encourage or enable the use of U.S.-supplied weapons to strike inside Russia.
Now, the move comes as Russia has, in fact, been making significant advances around Kharkiv. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky recently chided his Western allies for not providing enough military support. Now, amid these growing tensions, President Biden also faced pressure from his allies to break the long-standing policy. Earlier this week, France and Germany gave permission to Kyiv to use their weapons to neutralize military targets inside Russia.
Alors comment on explique aux Ukrainiens qu'il va falloir protéger?
We think that we should allow them to neutralize the military sites from which the missiles are fired. The missiles and basically the military sites from which Ukraine is attacked. But we must not allow them to hit other targets in Russia.
Dans le même cadre, on pense qu'on doit leur permettre.
Ukraine has every possibility under international law for what it is doing. That has to be said explicitly. It was attacked and may defend itself. I find it strange when some people argue that it should not be allowed to defend itself and take measures that are suitable for this.
Now, reports say Kyiv has been allowed to use American anti-aircraft weapons in both Ukrainian and Russian airspace, but it cannot target Russian aircraft that are on the ground inside Russia. Ukraine also cannot fire long-range missiles into Russian territories. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin has warned the West against letting Ukraine use their weapons to strike Russian territory. Putin says NATO members are playing with fire and their actions could trigger a global conflict. Kremlin officials say Moscow's patience is wearing thin after alleged attacks on Russian cities, oil refineries, and even against elements of its nuclear early warning system. Now, with the United States giving Ukraine the green light to use its weapons inside Russia, will Putin take a step back, or will his warning of a global conflict become a reality? And in the Middle East, as the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas continues, repeated Israeli airstrikes in Jabalia in northern Gaza has left the town in ruins. Within a span of 24 hours, at least 53 Palestinians were killed, leaving 400 wounded from rampant Israeli bombardment. Israel says the airstrikes were part of a winding down of operations in Jabalia. However, Palestinians say their tents and their shelters have been bombed into dirt.
Can you see the school? There is nothing left in one piece. It has all been burnt. It is all destroyed, as you can see. There were 1 million tents here for the displaced, 1 million tents in the grounds. It is all gone, and the firing has reached us.
The camp is destroyed. It has been destroyed. It is wiped. You can't recognize your house. You cannot recognize your house with all the buildings that have been wiped out.
And not stopping in the north, in southern Gaza, Israel carried out additional airstrikes and deployed more tanks and troops into the city of Rafah. Israel says that it has neutralized at least 300 Hamas fighters in Rafah since the operation first began earlier in May.
We have already eliminated around 300 terrorists in Rafah in this operation so far. Some of them were hiding underground. Our troops fought them bravely in close quarters combat. Very, very difficult conditions. We have lost our own troops. We mentioned just yesterday 3 of our boys. Soldiers have been seriously injured, but IDF have found dozens of launchers along the corridor.
Now, as Israel amplifies its attacks on Hamas, the Palestinian group has offered to renegotiate a ceasefire. In a statement to mediators in Qatar and Egypt, Hamas said that it would accept a complete agreement, including a hostage prisoner swap. However, Hamas says a deal would only be possible if Israel completely halts all military operations in Gaza. Hamas has also accused Israel of using the negotiations as a cover for aggression and genocide against Palestinians. The Palestinian group also blamed Israel for ignoring Hamas' positive position during negotiations by invading the city of Rafah. Hamas says that Israel's occupation of Rafah has resulted in the complete shutdown of humanitarian aid entering the Gaza Strip from Egypt. So far, Israel has not responded to the allegations made by Hamas. Meanwhile, Israel's national security advisor says that his country will not agree to end the war against Hamas in exchange for the release of all remaining hostages. With neither Hamas nor Israel willing to cede any ground, millions of Palestinians are left stranded in a bloody war in which they have no say and no control. And moving to East Africa, Kenya has launched a landmark inquiry against the Royal British Army. British soldiers stationed in the African nation have been accused of human rights violations, including torture, unlawful detention, and even murder. This week, hundreds of Kenyans flocked to 4 public hearings to narrate their ordeals. Our next report brings you the details about the inquiry and the painful testimonies of the victims.
For decades, people of Kenya have called for action against the Royal British Army for allegedly committing crimes in the East African nation, and it looks like they are finally getting what they want. A parliamentary defense committee in Kenya has launched a landmark inquiry to hear the heartbreaking testimonies from Kenyans who say they were mistreated by troops from the United Kingdom. These soldiers have been stationed at the British Army Training Unit in Kenya, or Batuk. The base was established in the central town of Nanyuki shortly after the East African nation gained independence from the UK in 1963. However, the British soldiers residing in Batuk have been accused of human rights violations and abuse of power. These include mistreatment, torture, unlawful detention, and even murder. This week, hundreds of people flocked to the 4 public hearings to narrate their ordeals of alleged misconduct by British troops. In the most high-profile case dates back to 2012. 21-year-old Agnes Wanjiru was found dead in a septic tank. She had been seen with a group of British soldiers the night before. In 2019, an inquiry concluded that she was killed by 1 or 2 British officers. This week, her family leveled further allegations saying that Batuk and the Kenyan authorities were involved in a cover-up of her death. While the Kenyan investigators have opened a probe into Wanjiru's death, they have not charged anyone. In another incident, 22-year-old Chaula Mamusi was allegedly run over by a British Army truck in 2019 and has been in a wheelchair ever since. Mamusi's mother claims that British troops told her they would take care of her injured daughter if she doesn't file a lawsuit against them. Another emotional testimony came from 28-year-old Jean-Rika Namru, who was accompanied by her 5-year-old daughter. She said she was in a consensual relationship with a British soldier who left her when she became pregnant. Now, the only thing Namru wants is child support so that her daughter can go to school. The public hearings also saw a string of people who complained of health issues after a fire was allegedly started by British soldiers in 2021. This was during a training exercise being hosted at a wildlife sanctuary. The blaze lasted for 4 days and destroyed more than 12,000 acres or about 5,000 hectares of land that left at least one person dead. Another witness testified that he was attacked by a lion because natural habitat was destroyed by the fire, forcing the animal to come close to human settlements. Meanwhile, several others said they developed respiratory and eye problems. Over 7,000 locals are believed to have started legal action against the British Army following the fire incident. Now, the defense partnership between the UK and Kenya allows up to 10,000 British soldiers every year. However, this time Kenya wants justice. The African nation's defense minister has promised to prosecute British soldiers who are found guilty of breaking Kenyan law. However, Britain says it doesn't accept the jurisdiction of Kenyan courts. While Kenya believes it should be able to try British soldiers that may have committed grave offenses against Kenyans.
And finally, in Brazil, orange groves have been plagued by a disease which makes the fruit bitter. The South American nation, which supplies 70% of the world's oranges for the juice-making industry, is also suffering from climate change and severe weather. Orange juice makers are now mixing other fruit, including apples, grapes, and mangoes, to meet demand. Our final report takes you inside the plight of Brazilian juice makers.
Orange juice has long been the global favorite, outshining apple, peach, and pineapple juice. No breakfast table is complete without a jug of OJ. Numerous cocktails just don't mix without it. But now, it seems the world might have to say goodbye to their beloved OJ. The global orange juice industry is in quite the citrusy conundrum. Wholesale prices of oranges have gone bananas. They have rocketed to the moon. And it's because of disastrous harvests in Brazil, which supplies 70% of oranges to the global juice industry. This week, orange juice concentrate prices squeezed out to a record high. It is now nearly $5 for 1 pound or nearly half a kilogram of orange juice concentrate. Brazilian orange growers are predicting a 24% drop in this year's harvest. And this will amount to just 232 million boxes of orange juice. Farmers say that orange trees are dying because of citrus greening, a relentless disease that's making the trees greener but the outlook grimmer. It turns the fruit bitter before killing the tree. The green disease is spread by sap-sucking insects, and it is all thanks to last year's extreme heat and drought. Climate crisis is giving the oranges a real roasting. This is the third difficult year for the global harvests in a row. Brazil's harvests are already in a pit. The global orange juice scene is looking not so juicy. Manufacturers can't even mix in frozen juice reserves this time around, as they too have been squeezed dry. The International Fruit and Vegetable Juice Association is now pondering upon a wild idea. They are lobbying for changes to the UN food regulations, so that the orange juice can be clubbed with other citrus fruits. It looks like desperate times call for fruity measures. Experts are painting a grim picture, as Brazilian orange groves remain plagued by greening disease. The soaring costs and bad growing conditions have contributed to the lowest global supplies in decades. It looks like a real juice crisis is upon the world. Drink makers are resorting to lower quality juice, whipping up mixed juices with apples, mangoes, or grapes. Some orange juice makers want to change customers for their beloved juice. The orange juice industry is in a real pickle, with no quick fix in sight. consumers might need to brace themselves for higher prices, or cultivate a taste for some new fruity friends at the breakfast table.
That's our show for today. We certainly thank you for tuning in all week. We hope you have a great weekend, and we hope to see you right back here next week. From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden. How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America.
Hello.